Are you a businesswoman who is finding it challenging to get your ideas across and make a point? Welcome to Speakers Who Get Results with Elizabeth Bachman, a podcast dedicated to helping women get the visibility they want, whether making a speech or talking in a meeting. Every week, get valuable lessons from Elizabeth or learn from her roundtable conversations with experts and speakers on how to make a difference, not just a point. On to the show with your host, Elizabeth Bachman.
Hello, and welcome to Speakers Who Get Results. I'm Elizabeth Bachman, your host, and this is the podcast where we talk about leadership and visibility, presentation skills. And today we're talking about management and how do you handle if you have a toxic person on your team, or if you're on the team and there's a toxic boss, whatever. We have the wonderful Dr. Mitch Kusy. Before I go into that conversation, though, I'd like to invite you to find out how your presentation skills are by taking our free 4-minute assessment at speakforresultsquiz.com. That's speakforresultsquiz.com. And that it takes about 4 minutes. And that's how you can find out where your presentation skills are strong and where, if not, you could get a little bit of support so that you can get the results you need and the recognition that you deserve. If you score high enough, there's also a place where you can ask for a free 45-minute conversation with me to talk about those results and what you could do. Today, my guest is the delightful Dr. Mitchell Kusy, who is a professor and organizational psychologist and a part of our Pride Month guests, who's also talks about his partner of 35 years. Dr. Kusy, his official bio is very impressive. He was a Fulbright Scholar in Organization Development, and he is now a professor in the Graduate School of Leadership and Change at Antioch University. His passion is co-designing work cultures to improve staff and customer experiences so that will increase team performance, everyday civility, and the bottom line. Mitch has consulted and been a keynote speaker with hundreds of organizations nationally and internationally, helping create work culture of respectful engagement, impacting individual, team, and bottom line performance. He previously headed leadership and organization development at American Express Financial Advisors and Health Partners. Mitch's client list ranges from A to Z, from AT&T to firms in New Zealand. There's a huge list on his website. His recent work is with the Healthy Workforce Institute, focusing on increasing civility, civil behavior, that is, in the healthcare field. Mitch is a best-selling author with 6 business books and over 100 research to practice articles. His most recent book is Why I Don't Work Here Anymore. Dr. Kusy is the recipient of the Minnesota Organization Development Practitioner of the Year Award. He resides in Minneapolis and in Palm Springs, and you will see from our conversation what a nice person he is to be talking about handling toxic people. I know you'll enjoy it. On to the interview. Mitch Kusy, welcome to Speakers Who Get Results. Thank you for jumping in.
I'm delighted. I'm delighted to be here. And our previous chat before this, I'm excited.
Well, good. You go in the category of people who I hadn't met you before, but once I met you, I said, why haven't we been friends forever?
I know.
And we will be friends
with
forever.
getting old.
Yeah. But just different networks. Anyway, I have lots of things to ask you about, but before I get started, let me ask you who your dream interview would be. If you could interview someone who's no longer with us, who would it be? What would you ask them? And who should be listening?
Wow, that's a great question. I would have to say Beverly Sills, the famous opera diva, who is no longer with us.
Mm-hmm.
And there's an interesting piece of information about Beverly, and by the way, you could probably tell by my choosing her, I'm really an opera buff. And the interesting fact of information about Beverly, who was world famous, one of the top opera divas in the world, is that she had two children who couldn't appreciate her talent.
Yeah.
And one child was deaf and had multiple sclerosis. And the other child had multiple handicaps. He was mentally disabled, and neither could enjoy her talent the way many could in the world. So the question would be, what was that like for you? And interestingly, as we were talking before in her biography, she doesn't say anything like, why me? Her question is, why them? So I want to ask her about what was that like for her?
It's one of those cosmic ironies. As you know, I grew up listening to Beverly Sills. She was the reigning diva of my time, and my parents loved her. My mother especially just had loved her dearly. And then we had friends she was on the board of the Multiple Sclerosis Foundation, and have other friends who were friends of hers because her daughter had multiple sclerosis. But in some ways, it's a more visible version of what happens to so many people where life doesn't turn out the way you expect.
Right. And she went on with her life, became really famous, and gave her talent to so many people. And I bet in some ways that, I don't know how I'm guessing on this, but I'll bet in some ways her children appreciated what she brought in any way that they could.
Yeah, exactly. They just couldn't understand what the fuss was that she was so famous for. So, you know, it's like being the child of a painter and you're colorblind. Yes. So that would be very interesting. I admired her. And someday when you and I are in the same room at the same time and there's a lot more alcohol, I will tell you about the first time I met Beverly Sills.
Well, that's
which is
great.
One of the great disaster stories of all time. So
I'll take you up on that, and I'll have a martini when we're doing this.
Okay, yes, it's definitely a story that needs alcohol.
Right.
In any case, I asked you here to talk to us about the work you're doing, helping leaders cope with toxic employees.
Yes.
And I think the first question I have to ask is, you're such a nice guy. How did you get started talking about and studying toxic people?
Well, I appreciate that question. I get that question asked a lot. And the best answer I could give you, Elizabeth, is it was quite serendipitous how this happened to me. It wasn't planned. And there were two as sort of events that occurred. One event was I walked into an elevator and I smelled a special perfume. And I knew I smelled that perfume previously, but I couldn't put my finger on it. And then something strange happened. I got sick to my stomach. And it was a visceral response, really sick. And I'm saying, what is going on? And it was about 2 or 3 days later that I realized what was going on. I smelled that perfume in my mind, and I realized it belonged to an individual I worked with who wore that perfume, and she was highly toxic. And many people left the organization in her wake. So subsequently, that was the first event. And the second is my dear colleague, Dr. Elizabeth Holloway, when I was new at Antioch University, and she's a professor there as well, and I am as well. And she said, Mitch, have you ever thought of doing a study to look at toxic behaviors in organizations? And when she asked that question, I got sick to my stomach again, thinking about that perfume.
Oh, dear.
And I immediately said yes, because I wanted to find out if I'm having this kind of response, I wonder what's going on with other people. And that's when we embarked on a study with over 400 leaders in our research to examine how true is it related to toxic behaviors. Is it a figment of our imagination, or is there reality to that? And what do we do about it?
Okay. All right. Well, certainly what do we do about it is the main thing I'm going to ask you. What's the difference between toxic behavior and somebody who just does something bad? I mean, I think about the times that people have stabbed me in the back. Fortunately, it weren't too many of them, but in my opera days, there are companies I could never go back to because somebody was threatened by me and lied about me to the general director, who thereafter believed that I was a horrible person. But the times I've been stabbed in the back,
Yes.
compared to actual toxic behavior.
So let's dissect that. I do work primarily, other than my professor role, do work primarily with the Healthy Workforce Institute.
Mm-hmm.
And Dr. Renee Fleming is the CEO of that organization. And one of the things that I've learned from her that's validated by the research is, first of all, it doesn't matter what you call it, toxic behaviors, disruptive behaviors, bullying. There are three primary characteristics that make someone toxic or disruptive or a bully. And I learned this from, did I say Dr. Renee Fleming?
There's an opera joke
I take that back. Renee Fleming is the current opera diva.
Yes.
That I absolutely love. I meant to say, and I've got egg all over my face, Dr. Renee Thompson, who is the CEO of the Healthy Workforce Institute and the founder of that. Now, what I learned from Dr. Renee Thompson is this. You can tell that these aren't pre-rehearsed. These are just off the cuff.
It's the joy of live interviews.
Yes,
I love it.
Absolutely. The joy of live TV, if you will.
Yes.
There are three characteristics. The behavior needs to be targeted,
it
needs to be harmful, and it needs to be repeated. So targeted to one person or one individual, one group. So for you, the scenario that you just raised is that it was this behavior of stabbing in the back was targeted towards you first. It's harmful. What harm was created? Well, one of the harm could be you're reluctant to work with this individual on a team, et cetera. So it's harmful. And the third is it's repeated. And the way you talked, it was not just a one-time deal. So that would make that behavior highly toxic, as opposed to someone having a bad day. You know, to be honest, Elizabeth, we've all been uncivil at times. And because we're human.
Yes.
We make mistakes. But if it's not targeted, harmful, and repeated, then what we understand is that it is not going to be highly toxic behaviors. And there's something else that I see as a benchmark, is that many times when we're uncivil, not everybody, but there's a tendency to apologize to someone with that incivility.
If you've been impolite, rude.
If you've been impolite, you've been uncivil, you said something that wasn't nice. We've all done this. But hopefully, if it's not in the categories of targeted, harmful, and repeated, it's easier to do something about it.
You know, I'm a word person. So I am enjoying the fact that you're using the word civility, which comes, I haven't looked it up, but it is related to civilization and people working together. Professor Kusy, you probably do know the root of that word, but talking about having civility in the workplace, being polite so that we get along as a group.
That's right. And, you know, there's sort of a connotative and a denotative definition of that.
And for our listeners who don't speak English, will you say that?
Thank you very much.
This is an international podcast, remember.
There's two ways to interpret civility. One way to interpret civility is it's really respectful to individuals, to act in ways that we demonstrate concern to that individual. Then there's the aspect of civility that I'm just going to be civil and respectful to your face, but afterwards do some things that harm that person.
Mm.
So, but the kind of civility we're talking about, where we're working together as a team, we don't say everything that comes into our mind about
Right.
that individual out of respect for that person. And one of the hallmarks too is, I hear this often when I'm coaching people, is are you coaching something, concept or practice to someone where they can make a change in their behavior? But are you trying to coach them on something where it's not in their realm to make a change in that behavior? So we need to look at that. And that's all under the rubric of civility, respect.
Civility. Okay. I actually think about my mother used to say, manners are the grease that keep the gears of society running smoothly.
Afterwards, you've got to send that to me. I want to use that on a PowerPoint, and I'll credit your mother.
Okay.
You've learned a lot from your mother.
Okay. Yes,
you know what I learned from my mother? I'll tell you what I learned from many things.
Yes.
But I learned how to cook Italian from my mother, because my mother was Sicilian.
Okay. Well, my mother was all about be polite.
Yes.
And that's another conversation, probably with that martini.
Another conversation.
Let me get into some of the practical things you can do. And so say you are leading a team and there is someone in the team who is not being civil. If you have somebody toxic on your team, what can you do?
There's a whole range of strategies. And I always say, start with the easiest. And one of the strategies that I've learned, this is from Dr. Deborah Meyerson, who wrote the book Tempered Radicals and did research on this. So let's pretend in this team meeting, someone, and let's pretend this is a woman, provides a suggestion. The leader of the group said, I need some suggestions. And this woman provides a suggestion. It's a really good suggestion. And a gentleman responds and says essentially the same thing that this woman did. And people on the team say, wow, what a great suggestion, John.
This happens all the time. Yes.
I know. Every time I relate this case, I hear this all the time, particularly from women, but I also hear it from men who, for one reason or other, they are marginalized. So the tempered radical does this. The tempered radical, let's say the leader is now the tempered radical. And remember, everybody's rallying around what John said. And the tempered radical says, John, I want to thank you for taking, let's pretend the person is Elizabeth's idea here and running with it. So Elizabeth, wow, thank you for initiating this great discussion right now. So what Deborah Meyerson says is that the tempered radical makes change in quiet ways.
Okay.
Some would say, maybe that's a little passive aggressive, and maybe it is, but the intent here was to really give credit where credit is due, and others didn't acknowledge that credit. So that is one of the things I learned from the research of Deborah Meyerson, and that's like a baby step where you start.
And I have to ask, because that sort of thing about men repeating, and it's not just men, it's a single focused people who are really thinking about one thing and they're thinking about what they, quite often the case is they hear it subconsciously. And because they're not actually paying full attention to the person who's speaking, that 5 minutes later they say the same thing and they really do think they thought it up.
They do think they thought it up. I don't believe.
So is that toxic behavior, or is that just not listening? Okay,
so let's look at that. Let's examine. Let's go back to what I said that makes it toxic. Is it targeted? Is it harmful? Is it repeated? So is it targeted? Is it targeted not just to this one individual, and his name is John? Does he have a tendency to do that a number of times? So first of all, it's targeted.
Okay.
Check that off. Is it harmful? Yes, because some individual may not speak up and give their ideas at a team meeting that could improve the team performance.
If they're being shut down all the time,
Yes. And is it repeated? Yes, the individual has done this at many times, and you'll hear things like, well, there goes John again, Well, when you hear those kinds of things, you know it's been repeated. So using the litmus test of targeted, harmful, repeated, yes, indeed it is.
Even though it may not have been intentional.
Intention doesn't have anything to do with it.
Okay.
It could be conscious or unconscious.
Uh-huh.
Intention doesn't matter. When you start getting into intention, and that's the problem when you give people feedback about their behavior, they can say, that's not my intention, and it goes off in another round.
Direction.
So
Okay.
intention doesn't matter. Don't even go there, conscious or unconscious. This is what happened. This is the behavior, and don't label it to the individual as toxic. Don't use that term. And say, this is what happened at the meeting. This has happened a number of times. This is the result of when you do this.
When I can see why there are lots of times where you have to decide at what point is it bad enough that you have to take action.
Mm-hmm.
What can you do if you're on the team and you perceive that you are being disregarded or attacked and the manager isn't doing anything?
There are several things. First of all, I tell my clients, ask this question: how much worse off will I be if I say something? And if you perceive you're going to be significantly worse off, don't not say anything yet, but then you go to the second. Go to a trusted individual, someone that you know will just not say, oh yeah, poor Mitch, but give you honest feedback.
Mm-hmm.
You think you understand the context of this organization, you understand the dynamics of this team.
Mm-hmm.
Should I say something about it? And then listen to their feedback. If indeed there is some perception that you should say something, there are a number of strategies. The first strategy, and I'm not saying it's in a priority order, one strategy is to give the person feedback on their behavior.
Mm-hmm.
Go directly to the individual, and you made a determination.
Not
I
in
can
public.
do this. And I found a 4-step process that I use as part of the Healthy Workforce Institute. First of all, it's scripting this entire 4-part process. So you script it ahead of time because it's highly anxiety producing, Elizabeth, to give this person feedback. So you script it ahead of time. You script 4 things: the intro, behavior, the impact, and the tossback. The intro. Something happened at this meeting today, and I want to talk with you about it. Period. Intro. Then if they give the okay, or maybe it's another time we're going to talk about it, a better time. The behavior is when I have been giving feedback at this meeting, you as the leader of the team have been interrupting me. Period. Notice I didn't say you shamed me. Notice I didn't say you intimidated me, because those are terms that can be convoluted and someone can work their way around.
Or
but
emotionally loaded. Yeah.
Behavior. The impact. The impact is I am fearful of speaking up at this meeting, or I'm angry and I have decided to shut down so we can do something about it. Toss back. I'd like to hear your thoughts. When might be a good time to talk about it? So the intro to behavior, the impact, and the toss back. And you script it ahead of time.
Yeah.
So that's
and maybe practice. Maybe practice saying it with somebody, a trusted person.
Exactly. That's why you want to script it ahead of time.
Right.
Because it's threatening.
Yeah.
And okay, so one strategy is the tempered radical strategy. The other strategy is giving feedback. Another strategy, moving up the ladder, if you will, is if it is threatening, and let's pretend it's your boss, because one of the top questions I get is, what if my boss is, say, you've tried the tempered radical approach, that didn't work. You tried the scripting it with the 4 phases, that didn't work. And your next strategy, again, you're asking yourself, how much worse off will I be if I say something versus if I don't?
Yeah.
And you go to the boss's boss and you ask for a meeting with this individual, and so that you feel safe. There's got to be psychological safety. And you say, I want to talk with you about this. It's serious. And I'm going to bring in, and you bring in, let's say, a human resources professional to have that conversation with this individual.
Right. Now, but this is the conversation with the boss's boss or with the boss themselves?
Well, you could do a number of things, depends on how threatening. If it's the boss, my suggestion is to first go to the boss.
Mhm.
And you could try the scripting. If that didn't work, you can go with an HR person. If that didn't work, the next strategy would be the boss's boss. And you could even say something like, you know what, we're getting nowhere here. I want you to know I'm going to Sally and I'm going to invite HR and I want you to be here as well. So we have this conversation together.
Okay. All right. That sounds scary. That sounds really scary.
It's very scary, but these are scary. Otherwise, okay, what's the alternative? The person is going to quit.
Yeah.
Or one of the things I found in my study, they quit while still employed. So what they do is they say, well, John comes in at 8 in the morning. So I'm going to start work at 5 in the morning and I'm going to have at most 4 hours with him. And I'm not going to do anything extra. So you quit while being,
you keep collecting the paycheck, but not actually doing the work.
Exactly.
Yeah. That brings a whole bunch of things. I have a whole list of questions for you. One of the strategies that I have used with my clients, I've helped my clients use, is if the boss is not listening, then who does the boss listen to? And that's where, if it's C-level, if you are high, I tend to work with people who are at a pretty high level. So if you're at a high enough level, do you have any relationship with anyone on the board? One of the things that happens a lot is that people get promoted to higher level positions without ever learning how to be a manager. And then they become that toxic manager because they really don't know what they're doing, but they can't admit that to themselves. Or, I don't know, I've had 3 clients in that situation in a row because nobody ever trained the manager how to be a manager. And suddenly she's the chief information officer and is being terrible to the team, which gets me to, I'm going to put my second question on hold. Let me ask you, what do you do if you've got somebody and you realize they're toxic, but they're mostly toxic because they don't know what they're doing? It's not intent, it's they're paddling as fast as they can, but they're still underwater and they don't actually know how to be a good manager. Is there an answer to that?
Well, the answer that I would give is, in the work that I've been doing the past many years on this, it is rare to find someone who's toxic because they're incompetent.
Okay.
The behaviors, I shouldn't say never, I hardly ever hear, well, this boss doesn't understand spreadsheets. What I hear is, this person's a horrible leader. They can't help engage the group in setting a vision for our team. They don't recognize the talent of this team.
Micromanaging.
Now, one could say that's an incompetent leader, but the incompetence is about relationships. The incompetence isn't about the person is a bad CPA. In fact, here's an interesting statistic. I do a lot of work also with healthcare organizations. And one of the interesting dynamics is, in sort of the opposite frame that you just shared, is what happens with the physician who's the top-ranked physician in the organization, but people are quitting left and right because of their behavior. Right. So they have the competence. And interestingly, healthcare has done more than any other industry in doing the research in this area. For example, there have been hundreds of studies that demonstrate anywhere from 60 to 80% of professionals in healthcare witnessed or experienced quitting as a result of a toxic individual.
Yeah.
Another study found that with an intimidating provider, individuals that report to this provider, anywhere up to 70 to 80% will seek the advice of someone else rather than this provider when it comes to a medication question. And subsequently, they all say that this impacts the safety of patients and the overall patient outcomes. And interestingly, as an organizational psychologist, I always thought that medical errors were due to incompetence. And the healthcare industry is now finding from 10 to 15 to 20 years of research that it's the intimidating, toxic behaviors that cause negative patient outcomes.
Wow. That's a good indicator for the value of emotional intelligence.
Yes, exactly.
And thank goodness we are finally getting to a point in business where that's being addressed.
Yes. May I tell a 1 minute case on this?
Do tell a case today. And then I have one other question for you. I don't want to keep you too long.
The case is this. I was doing a keynote address, Elizabeth, with 500 people in one room, and it was a non-healthcare audience. And I relate these statistics in healthcare because we're all impacted by healthcare.
Yeah.
And a gentleman raises his hand and says, Mitch, my wife is a nurse, and just last night she reported that she disagreed with a medication order. And he said she went to 2 to 3 other people to interpret that order rather than go to the intimidating provider. Then a woman raised her hand and said, Mitch, I'm a surgeon. I need to be intimidating in the operating room suite. Would you want to go to a surgeon who isn't perfect? And I said, Doctor, I want to go to a surgeon if they are about to make a mistake, someone feels comfortable enough to call them on that error. There was utter silence in the room. And I don't mean to demonize physicians. The research shows that there's lateral abuse in healthcare, nurse to nurse, physician to physician, and vertical abuse, physician to nurse, clinical nurse leader to clinical nurse, and that's vertical abuse. And it's approximately 77% vertical abuse, around 65% lateral abuse. So it's endemic everywhere in healthcare and beyond. It's just that healthcare has done more than any other industry.
So I've got one other question. A lot of what I do is it's all about putting yourself in the shoes of the other people, including in relationships. If you can figure out where they're coming from and what they care about, you can tailor what you have to say in a fashion that they're going to say, oh, she's speaking my language. I think it probably comes from my many years of training as an actor to put myself in to say, what was it that motivated this villain to, Scarpia in Tosca? What motivates him to try to kill the tenor and seduce the soprano? Does it do any good to try to figure out where they're coming from?
To an extent. Let's go back to the script, the intro, the behavior, the impact, and the tossback. Answer your question. It's the impact. So the impact could be something like this, and this is where they're coming from.
Yeah.
You perceive that this individual wants to be a good leader, and she is not being a good team leader right now. Intro, behavior, impact. The impact, Sally, is that others perceive what's going on, that they're starting to shut down as well. And I know that you want to have an engaged team, or even I am shutting down, and this prevents you from being as effective as you can because you're not getting my engagement in the team. So what you're doing is you're looking at that impact, how it might impact that individual. And you could say something like, I don't know if this is right. I'd like your feedback on this, because you could be wrong with that.
Yeah. This is the way it seems to me.
Exactly.
What do you feel? What is it like from your point of view?
Exactly.
Yeah. Very interesting. Mitch Kusy, I could talk to you for hours.
I could too, Elizabeth.
I'm going to have you back, but we are out of time. So you have written several books specifically to address this issue. You've got one called Why I Don't Work Here Anymore. There's another one about this toxic behavior.
It's called Toxic Workplace.
Toxic Workplace. Okay. I assume we can find all of that on your website, which we will put in the show notes.
Absolutely. And the first book, if people want to read it, that I would recommend is my latest book called Why I Don't Work Here Anymore. And I wish we had another minute because I could tell you how that title came about.
Oh, tell us.
Okay. I go work out at 5 a.m. and I went to do my workout, and I came back about 6:45, and my partner, Scott, of 35 years, my life partner, I said to him, Scott, what's going on? You woke up in the middle of the night, writing. He said, Mitch, I've got the title of your next book. And so Scott is a biomedical engineer. He's a marketing person. I'm thinking to myself, what would Scott know about marketing anyway? But I kept my mouth shut because I'm a good partner.
Good
he
spouse.
said, the title of your book should be Why I Don't Work Here Anymore. I said, wow, that is brilliant. And previous, the title of the draft of the book was No Work Jerks Allowed, and I couldn't get a publisher to take the book. And I said, that's brilliant. He said, yeah, because, you talk about how 12% of individuals quit because of a toxic person. In your own study, 51% are likely to quit. In healthcare, you talk about how 30.7% of nurses knew someone who quit. Moral of the lesson is this. First of all, I got a contract for the book by the end of the week. And the moral is this, 2 morals. One is you can judge a book by its cover. And the second, sometimes you should trust your life partner of 35 years. They might know something.
Yes. Well, they've probably seen it from the outside, and
That's
you're
right.
too close. Yeah.
Yes.
Well, thank you, Scott, for having given us the great title, which then got you the contract, which got you this great book. So
yes, thank you. And thank you, Elizabeth. You're a great interviewer. I love talking with you, and I hope just one thing I said helps create less toxic anxiety in the world.
I hope so. I hope so indeed. Thank you, Mitch Kusy, for being part of this. We'll put all this information in the show notes. And in the meantime, this has been Speakers Who Get Results. I'm Elizabeth Bachman, your host. And let me remind you that if you're curious about your presentation skills, both within your organization and within your industry, you can take our quiz at speakforresultsquiz.com. That's www.speakforresultsquiz.com. And that's where you can see where your presentation skills are strong and serving you, and where perhaps a little bit of support could get you the results you need and the recognition you deserve. This has been Speakers Who Get Results. I'll see you on the next one.
We have just concluded another great episode of Speakers Who Get Results with your host, Elizabeth Bachman. If you got value from today's episode, please feel free to share us with your friends and colleagues. You may also visit elizabethbachman.com for additional resources. Be sure to tune in every week for new episodes, and thanks for tuning in.